Well, hello everybody. Happy Thursday. Welcome back to Aquarius Rising Africa with me, Chantelle, your hostess with the mostest awesome guests and viewers. And tonight again is testament to that with Dr. Dennis Carroll. And we're going to be chatting part 2 about the Vril Society. But before we bring Dr. Dennis on, I want to just mention to you, and I'm going to put it on the screen at some point as well, but just in the description area, we've put a link in there for the book that Dr. Dennis will be talking about now. So you guys can download it, check it out. There is a link. It's in the description area. And yeah, let's get going because I think we are in for some deep dives tonight or this morning for you. Welcome everybody in the chat. Really good to see you. Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us. And ta-da, there he is. Dr. Dennis, how are you?
Hello. Good to be back again. I hope we're gearing up for part 2 here.
I'm telling you, I'm gearing up for part 2. Yeah, I've gone through half that book. It is mind blowing. But before we get there, won't you please just open for us in prayer? I think we definitely need that.
All righty. Let's bow our heads. Dear Heavenly Father, we ask today that you will bless us, bless everyone watching and listening to this program today, that you will seal us with your protection, that you will open our spiritual minds to what we need to learn today. We ask also that you will bless each and every one of the people watching today, and that you will touch them in a special way. We ask this in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Dennis. Yay. So, wow. I mean, for those of you who didn't watch last week's show with Dr. Dennis and myself, please go and check it out. It is on Aquarius Rising Africa. We sort of started talking about the Vril Society. And I got to tell you, Dennis, so many things are just going ting, ting, ting for me. I've actually listened to the book. It is on audiobook as well. And, you know, while I'm just doing things, I listen. And then what I like to do later is listen and read at the same time. So I'm still going to be doing that. But wow, so many incredible things. So, Dennis, what do you have to say for part 2 today?
Well, I'll do a little recap right quick on part 1, which we were talking about the Vril Society for those who don't know or didn't hear part number 1 there. The Vril Society was a group of people who got together because of this book that we're talking about. It was written back in the 1800s, and that's how far back this book goes. They formed different societies, supposedly. It began, I think, a good bit of the spiritualist movement in the world. And also, I think it had a very distinct effect upon the Nazi Germany, too, for that matter. We're going to get into that again today, too. But the Vril Society, at its beginning, was a spiritualist type movement. And it began that way. And it spread from the United States, which was where this book was originally published, and it also spread to the UK, the United Kingdom, and then from there it went to Germany, and that's when it really caught fire, when it got to Germany. So it's very interesting in what its history is, but there are so many different connections to the Vril Society, so many things that it may have been the basis for, and that's what we're gonna go deeper in our dive today on this. Absolutely, it's gonna get wild, so everybody buckle up here because this is gonna really, really get wild. But
buckle up, buttercups.
There you go. Good. Buckle up and buckle down, or whatever, how that goes. But the interesting thing about the Vril Society, like I said, was this effect I think that it had upon Nazi Germany, especially. But like we told about in part 1, they were looking for supernatural power in all the wrong places. Definitely, they were looking for it in every way possible with artifacts and all this. And so when the Vril Society said, "Hey, we have connected with an alien consciousness. we're getting information from these people out there somewhere. Um, and this goes into what I would like to term the alien conspiracy. That's basically what it is, and it goes across many generations, different centuries, many continents in the way that it supposedly works out. But the Vril Society had a distinct part in it. And here's another interesting thing, Shandy, that we need to think about today. The Vril Society also had its different roots growing in things like the Black Sun, the Left Hand Path, the Thelema, and the Golden Dawn. The list goes on and on and on. And of course, the Rosicrucians had a big thing to do with this as well. And guess what? The Vril Society has not ended. It is still ongoing in that because it is still the beginning of all these societies, these secret societies,
Yes.
especially secret occult societies that are still in the world.
That for me, in terms of what I've been looking at, reading, listening to, has become very clear for me. And I actually made a note of it here. What's become clear to me, and please correct me if I'm wrong, and of course, anyone in the chats, I welcome your input as well. The Vril Society, because there was this, if we're listening, okay, let me just backtrack a little bit. If we're listening to the book, okay, or reading the book, it comes across this really superior society, the Vril Society, but they've got different type of, there's different, I want to say, races of Vril, right? And they kind of live there, and they have got superior technology, etc., etc. I mean, a lot more, right? You get the good ones. And then, of course, understanding that this energy can be used for either or. So for me, it would seem that, especially when we're looking back at the Germans, Dennis, who the first ones who actually brought this out. I mean, the Vril energy was there already. That's clear. It's a force. Or a combination of energies, a combination of frequencies. That's something I actually wanted to bring up as well. That, of course, that can be used for positive or negative. These guys then chose to use it and corrupt it. So the ones that are currently using this Vril would be the elites or the bloodlines, right? Because they've been learning how to use it, using the liquid, I think they call it, the Vril fluid, the energy around it, right? The energy itself in everything they do, corrupting everything they do, because it is a super powerful force, right? From what we've seen. And
very good point. Definitely. We got to think about this too. Is this being sort of like the Force in Star Wars kind of a thing? Okay,
yeah.
The energy is out there. The Force, the power, whatever name you want to give it, is there, and it's immoral. In other words, it's immoral. So what it is it's not bad, and it's not good. It's just there to
it
be
is
used.
what it is. Yeah,
like you would, use gas in your car.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. You can either use it to power your car or burn someone's house down, right? So I mean, that's it's there for the taking. It's there for the using. And I think, when we're looking, because actually, before I get there,
but I think the interesting point of this, Shanty, is the fact that the Vril Society went after this in the wrong way, okay? Because they found out that this energy was there. This is what triggered the book that we're talking about, triggered their thoughts on this. And they said, hey, if this is real, or if there's anything like it out there, we want to hook up with it. We want that power, to be able to do things. Who wouldn't? This is almost like God-like power, okay?
yes,
That we're talking about here. And when you go back and you read that book about the Vrilia, that was the people that used this stuff. When you read about them, they were almost like gods in a way, and what we think they may have been, and there are hints to it, that they may have been the remnant of the people of Atlantis. And we need to do a show on nothing but Atlantis sometime, because that is a fascinating subject, because it goes through a lot of our history, culture, a lot of this stuff, and it has an alien connection with it as well. And that's why I say when you
Because
start getting into this stuff deep and you see this alien connection, you got to say, what's going on here? It's like the many arms on an octopus. It runs in many different ways, and it is behind a lot of this stuff. But here's the interesting point, just what you were talking about. The Vril Society said, hey, let's tap into this source. But they didn't realize that this so-called consciousness that they were connecting up to may have not been the good guys, may have not been a good factor in that. They disregarded that fact. And that is a bad thing. Let me say this, and I'll make a statement to everyone listening today, okay? When you open spiritual doorways, portals, whatever name you want to give them, when you open these things and communicate with the other side, what we call the other side, beyond the veil, or whatever the situation, when you communicate with somebody out there, you don't know who you're talking to. You really don't. It's just like, we used to warn people about hooking up with people on the internet. You don't know who that really is on the other side of that
right,
computer. Yeah. And that's what
exactly.
happened with the Vril. They didn't understand it. Hey, maybe we're being used by the wrong people in this. The so-called, here's the point. The so-called consciousness, universal consciousness is out there, may not be what it represents itself to be.
Exactly.
That's the problem.
I find this so interesting because if we go back to what we were talking about last week, right? Hitler and his cronies went on this mission to find this Vril energy that took them to the Himalayas, right? Now, when we look at the Himalayas, who really lives there? It's the saints. It's the people of the Eastern cultures, the Buddhists, the Hindus, whatever, So they would usually, now for and correct me if I'm wrong, this is something I've put together. They have used the Vril to find peace, because when they meditate, their purpose or their desire, if you will, is to find peace. So so they've used it for the positive side. Now, what Hitler did, and the Germans, they went in search of that Vril. And I mean, like I was saying last week, he was even taking measurements of the skull because he believed that the Asian people were direct descendants of the Vril, right? So, but then what he did was the Germans, and who I don't know who before them, right? Let's just blame the poor Germans, Hitler now, okay? Actually corrupted that and used it for very negative forces, such as the stuff that we're experiencing now that the elites are doing, mind control, that powerful force, that mind control, the way that they use children, weaponizing children with their own spiritual gifts. I mean, they would have recognized the kids born with a Vril, because kids with a bloodline, naturally, in my opinion, would be born with a Vril active in them. So they're looking for the kids with a Vril so that they can corrupt that Vril to their side of the coin. I don't know, Dennis, what's your take on that?
Well, I think absolutely that you got another good point in that, because we have to understand that this consciousness we're talking about is on kind of two different levels. You can have sort of what we would call a human consciousness, that connects us all together, kind of as human
Yeah,
beings. Okay. But then beyond that, you have what they were looking for, that universal consciousness. This universal wide, okay, kind of a thing. It is somewhat different, or sort of a higher level than the human consciousness stuff that's
right,
going on. You and I
right,
may think about the same thing sometime. We have that saying about great minds think alike, and we kind of hook up sometimes, and sometimes we even get premonitions of these things. We get, there is a definite human condition here going on with that, but there's something above that, a higher spiritual level of consciousness. And the
exactly.
interesting thing about this is, and you were talking about Hitler and his people measuring people's skulls and all that, they went from this tack. There is a master race of people on this planet. This is what he truly believed. Okay, I'm gonna lay this out for you right quick. It's real freaky, but this is what their belief was. There's a master race on this world, and they're saying we're the master race. okay? And we are the ones that know better than everybody. We're smarter, we're better. We therefore should rule as the master race. And why are we the master race?
Exactly.
Okay, that's the question. They would say, why are we the master race? Not because we were born someplace or like that, because we have a connection to this consciousness, this higher spiritual level
Yeah,
of consciousness. That was what he's wanting to tie this in with. See,
exactly.
this master race
Exactly.
thing, this eugenics thing. And here's how they felt about it. If you weren't part of the master race, then you didn't deserve to live on this planet. You didn't deserve anything on this planet. You would either be unalive that way, or you would either be our slaves. There was no in between thing on that. And that's the way they looked at the master race kind of thing. And when the Vril Society come up and said, hey, we're getting inside information from this universal consciousness that's out there, that's giving and it's feeding us information. Here's the interesting thing about it, Shanti. They were claiming they were getting scientific information from this.
Yes,
They
yes,
were claiming that,
absolutely.
hey, we can tell you how to build flying saucers. We can tell you how to build better V2 rockets. We're getting technological information from this. Okay. It's not just a spiritual thing, it's a technological, and that's what really got the attention of the Nazis and Hitler.
Yes,
Said, hey, we can use this to foster the master race theory, because if we're connected to this, that means we're better than everybody else on earth. And that's
exactly. And that's why also I think from what I've been hearing, Hitler kind of, because after the First World War they had very little resources, so they therefore went in search of this Vril so that they could become and be that master. Well, I guess they were just searching. I guess what Hitler said was already theirs, right? Sort of the rediscovery of them being the master race. But Dennis, I have a question for you, and I touched on it briefly earlier on. So we understand the Vril is like a force, like, as we see in Star Wars, may the force be with you. So that force can be used for positive or negative. Do you think it is actually a force within itself that is contained within the universal atmosphere that people tap into? Or is it a combination of frequencies? Because energy is created from, obviously, frequencies. And depending on how you combine things is also the result you're going to get. Or do you think they've been able to put together a combination of God's frequencies to suit their purpose and invert that? Because the Vril to me is like, it's a highway to hell. If I have to describe it in one phrase, I would say, from what I'm hearing from the Vril, whether you're tapping into the right or the left of it, because when you look at the Rosicrucians, part of their principles is the law of extremes, right? So they would tap into the extremes of these laws, because that's what the Vril does. You can go to the complete extreme. So they use it to tap to the extremes of what may and even may not be possible. I don't know. What's your take on that?
Well, I think we got to look at it this way, and we talked about this in the first part one about the God particle, okay? And I think the God particle plays a big important role in this, because I think the God particle is directly connected to this consciousness, if that's what you want to call it, this energy, this force that's out there. And I think we're not, as human beings, I think our Creator doesn't want us tapping into that right now, because in our present form, we're not truly able to handle that to that extreme. We can't become gods. We're not ready to become gods. Okay. We don't have that. Yeah. We're not in that point of time where we need to be, definitely for that.
Still way too much ego. We still have way too much ego. I mean, we can get to a certain point, right? But thereafter, we're going to crash and burn.
Well,
as we see now.
Well, and that's what we've accused the government of doing a lot, and that's not. And the government's made up of what? People. Okay, that's the way that goes. But we weaponize everything. Okay, especially the government. They love that weaponization. And that's the first thing mankind, when he gets something. Like once upon a time, years ago, a guy picked a stick up and said, "Hey, I can make a spear out of this. I can weaponize this and do something with it." And that's the way mankind has been ever since. Okay, we weaponize everything because we're always thirsty and looking for that power. And that's the way Hitler was. He was looking for that power. He didn't care where he got it, what he had to do to get it, as long as he got it. That was the main
Yeah.
thing. And when you think about this power, this force, um, yeah, definitely. I think the hook up to it, the way to manipulate it or connect with it would definitely be through frequencies and vibrations. Tesla said
Yes.
that. If you want to understand
Yes.
the secrets of the universe, frequency and vibration
Sound
and
and
all.
vibration.
Yeah, it's very important. Yeah, because that's how you would definitely wire yourself into it. Okay. But what I'm saying earlier is this force is amoral. In other words, it can be good or bad. You can use it for either way. And I think that's why our creator doesn't want us tapping into it right now. Because we would use it in the wrong way and not the right way. Just like we've talked about AI in the past. And I can assure you without a doubt, AI is already demonically infested. Okay, because men were behind this. Okay, and mankind is not perfect, and is not in this form we're in right now. So we have a lot of flaws, and our Creator realizes that and knows that we don't need to get a hold of the God particle right now. Okay, that's
Right.
in our point in time, and definitely Hitler didn't need it to tap into it. But they didn't understand that they were being used, Shanty. They were being used by dark forces to manipulate them into doing
Yes.
things. And the
Yes.
dark
Yes.
forces
Yes.
have this attitude, just like say, okay, we're going to give you something, Shanty, but we're just going to give you a little bit of it. We're not going to share our power with you, but we're going to give you just a little enough of rope to hang yourself.
Yeah.
That's the way they operate.
I think it's and exactly, and it all boils down to intention, doesn't it? Because energy is non-emotional, right? So it's the intention. And when you are power hungry or when you are power crazy, like Hitler was, and obviously those that would attracted that he attracted into his hive, right? They all had that similar thing, power, power, power. And when you get all these power hungry people together and they all have this craving, they attract some very crappy entities which will then start working through them. And as we know, Dennis, they are super intelligent. I mean, it's like they're super, super smart, but they have absolutely no emotional intelligence or no compassion or no empathy, anything at all. So, but then you look on the other side again of people who are working with this life force energy. Okay, they will do it very differently. Like when you look at, for example, Buddhists or whatever other religion or faiths are using it to tap into peace, bring harmony, do good, right? So there's the other side of that. And then that, of course, is corrupted. So right now we're sitting between the two. Some are doing good, some are doing evil. And I think, that's really where we're at. I don't know. What is your take on that?
I believe that without a doubt, just like we talked about before, tools, you can build a house with a tool, you can use it as a weapon of war. That
Yeah,
depends on what your intention is. But unfortunately, mankind is so easily manipulated by
and
outside
corrupted.
forces. Look what they have done with just one thing you mentioned there, religion. How many people have been unalive in the name of
Yes,
God? And God had nothing to do with it, by the way. But that was what man's excuse was for doing what he needed to do. He used religion as a tool. And they can also use education as a tool. They can use science as a tool. They can use military. What the list goes on and on and on. And that's why they're so deep into these things, because they know they can use this rope to hang us with. And then we will gladly cooperate with them because we are wanting power too. And I told somebody the other day, we talk about CERN a lot. And here's the foolish thing about that. I know it's a quest of science, and that's good. Science is good about trying to learn things and better themselves, but it's corrupted from its very beginning, unfortunately, by the very fact of what we as human beings are, and we're so easily manipulated. When they throw these doors open, these dimensional doors, what do they know is not going to come through it? It's so foolish. It's like if you were sitting in your living room right now, Shanty, in the middle of the night, and somebody knocks on your door. Are you going to jump up and run over and just open the door? I hope not, because you might get a very bad unwanted visitor. You might not want. Don't do that. That would be, and that's what they're doing. They're just opening the door without realizing the consequences of what they're doing. And
Exactly.
that's what Hitler was doing too. When Hitler and the Nazis began to tap into this stuff and got deep into the Vril society, and the Vril society were mostly some of the most beautiful women in Berlin, by the way. Some of them were.
Yes.
They had a very influential part of the society on their side. It wasn't just, them saying, oh, we're psychics and we do all this. They had real deep society connections going on here. They had influence, these women did. Back in the day, especially back in World War I and II, they were a different set of things going on, but women still had influence in the background. They may not have been forefront with their influence like they are now, beginning to be. They still could have and wield a lot of influence on the men that they were married to. And a lot of these real women were married to people high in the what? Nazi party,
Yes, military. Wow. And if I remember correctly, we spoke about that last week as well, that the Vril Society was the only secret society at the time, and it's at the inception, where women were allowed in. Others did not allow women in. And in fact, there were 2 women that became quite prominent leaders of the Vril Society later on. And they also had, it was a thing with having long hair, right? They had to have long hair. And I'm wondering, and someone actually in the chat last week said, and I can't remember who, so forgive me, please, that it had something to do with being antennae or something, right? I'm not sure what your take is on that.
Well, I think if you go back and look at the book we've been talking about, the real true star and hero of the book was a woman, by the way. Okay. She was the woman that the guy fell in love with in the book. She was protecting him. She was the kind of the good guy in this, and not an antagonist. I think they kind of touched on that too. I think they kind of said, hey, we can be like this woman, kind of a thing, But here's the interesting thing about that, Shanty. Women have always been, for a long, long, long historical time, high priestesses in different cults. They have been high priestesses in different churches or whatever name religions you want to call it. Look at the religion of Diana, and the list goes on and on. Women were venerated in these things. Why? I've had a lot of people ask me that. Why were they kind of picking on women here? Because, we've talked about that before. Women are very sensitive to these things.
Yeah.
And they are the givers of life in this world. Okay.
Right.
That was why they were venerated so much. They would say, hey, here's our connection to God. This is our mother figure. This is our life giver. This is the connection to the gods that we're looking for, And that's why they made so many high priestesses. But yet they're also, now listen to this, they also exploited their sexuality as well.
Right.
Because look at all of the sub-priestesses that were prostitutes in some of these churches, okay? They exploited that aspect of the female, as well.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, that's always been that way. And that was another thing you got to look at. When you look at the Vril society, you got to say, hey, they're like the high priestesses of old, and that was kind of the role they wanted to put forward, especially to the Nazi party,
Wow. And I was in something I was watching as well. Obviously we know, and we spoke about that, they had this obsession with sex and sex magic. And apparently what they did was they would freeze men, like just about freeze them to the point of death. And then they would bring naked women to arouse them and obviously get them back. And they were trying to see if the sex magic would bring these guys back from the dead. Literally, some of them died. And then if they woke up and lived, they were then expected or forced to have sex with a prostitute or whichever woman was there, to see how powerful sex magic was, or sex itself was, in terms of attracting the Vril, right? Which was interesting, the lengths to which they would go to do that. And of course, then they also, through their perverse experiments, discovered that the Vril of the child is the strongest. So I do believe probably because the kids are pure, and they could contain the Vril more than what an adult could. That also sacrificing a child was definitely something that was highly.
Well, you definitely got that factor in there, absolutely. And let me say this: men have always sexualized women. Definitely, that's just the way it goes. Okay, that's the way it's been from day one and continues to this very day. Men sexualize women. They put them on a sort of a pedestal and say this is what we want from that and all that. But here's the thing about the sex magic, Shanty. Okay, you are exhibiting a lot of physical energy in the act of sex, but you're also exhibiting emotional energy and
Absolutely.
spiritual energy. That's what they were wanting to hook up into. It wasn't the physical energy part of it.
Yeah.
It was the emotional and spiritual aspects of it that they were wanting to tap into. Same thing with what the Vril Society told the Nazis. Hey, we're connected to this consciousness. We're getting information. They're aliens. That's what they told them. Said these are some kind of alien consciousness out there among the stars that is connected with us. They were right in one sense, but very, very wrong in the other sense in that respect, because they didn't understand that what they were probably truly hooking up with was demonic, and it was a part of a plan that the demonic had for this. And Hitler was their number one tool at that time to use that plan with. There's a lot of dark conspiracy stuff going on in the background of this. And like I said, that's a show for another time too. But it is fascinating to think about what was really going on in the shadows and the darkness behind all of this, and what was truly being. We are so easily gullible to this manipulation that they put forward on us, that it's really sickening in a way, because we are so open to this and so gullible that to our own harm in many ways because of
Right.
this. But that's just the way we are, unfortunately. Because what are we doing? We're corrupted by the thirst for power. And what did I say in the other show that we did? That is the number one addictive thing in this universe. Power.
Right. Power. And that's, of course, what they want. And that's, of course, what the Vril gives them. And with that intention, power knows no limits, right? A hunger, someone who's power hungry. All you got to do is look back on any dictator in history, no matter from which country or continent they come. They will go to the extremes to gain power.
If the Nazis got this power, what did they do with it? That's an interesting question and that's part of the equation here with the Vril Society. What was that power and what did they do with it? Did they build flying saucers? Did they build secret Antarctic bases? Did they go to the moon? Did they actually colonize Saturn? Did they hook up with aliens outside? There is a thought that through the Vril Society, through all of this, that Nazi Germany actually made a contract, a dark contract with alien forces outside of our world. And these alien forces would definitely be called something very much like fallen angels, kind of a thing.
Right.
If you wanted
Right.
to look at it that way, yeah. And these
Right.
alien forces, which are dark forces, they're not the good guys. Okay, they're not the guys showing up. Hey, we're gonna cure cancer. We're gonna solve all your problems. They didn't do that. They never have done that, and they're never gonna do that because they're the bad guys. They're not out for us. They only want to use us, use and abuse us, just like a tool. When you got through with that tool and it doesn't work anymore, you throw it away. You have no
Yeah.
regard for that. You have no apathy, no feeling for the things that you use like that. And they have none for us because, and here's the number one clincher, they are not humans.
Exactly. Exactly.
And the real society never
Exactly.
realized this. They never really got to understand, hey, what have we got a hold of here? What have we touched on? And the Nazis, they didn't care. They didn't care where this came from because they wanted power. Just like Hitler, he didn't
Exactly.
care what he did to get that. Look how many millions of people he unalived because of that. And
Yeah.
and
Exactly.
and I'm not talking about just the Jewish population. I'm talking about the millions of people worldwide that were killed because of this war. If you go back and look in history, the only man that probably did more to unalive people in this world was not Hitler, it was Stalin, by the way.
Yeah.
The way he did his own people, yeah. You've got some very evil actors that have done this, and that's what we've talked about before. The coming of the Antichrist and all this other stuff. This guy, the Antichrist, is going to make them look like schoolboys. Okay, but he's going
Exactly.
to do it in such a way he's going to manipulate mankind to the point beyond what even they have done
Right.
to mankind itself. But they didn't understand this, and they didn't really care. The Nazis didn't really care. As long as they got the power and they can take over the world and they could have their master race and subjugate everybody else, they didn't understand. They were playing right into the hands of the enemy of mankind itself. And they made
Right.
probably dark contracts. I know without a doubt they had to make these dark shadow agreements with these beings to do some of
Yeah.
the things they did. Who knows how far reaching it went? It could not be that far off the chart. They didn't end up on Saturn or the moon. Here's the interesting thing about Saturn. There's no way primitive man, listen to this statement. There's no way primitive man could have known that the planet Saturn has rings around it, but we've got evidence they did. And the only time, supposedly, I think it was like 1640 when a guy actually made a telescope and first saw the rings of Saturn. How did primitive man know about that? He had to get information
Exactly.
about it from somewhere. And
Right.
somebody said, well,
Exactly.
maybe somebody back in a cave one day actually made a telescope. Okay. But you didn't have the internet back then. Nobody could go on the internet and say, hey, look what I made, and it got around and everybody knew about it. No, it didn't spread that way. It couldn't have went that way. They had to have some type of inside information about
Yes.
that.
Well, I don't know if you watched any of my earlier shows that I did with Caleb Jade. I think they would have been some of the earlier shows that we really spoke about that, but I know we do speak about it on quite a few of them. Whereas part of the shadow military, as I call it, I don't know if that's the right word, but that's my word for it. These guys were obviously highly trained, also exactly had spiritual gifts, highly trained, and went through gate programs, etc., the wild hunt, horrible things that they had to go through. And then literally was sent on missions to collect these masks. There were 10 of them, I do believe, that were pre-mud flood from the living ships that actually all form together. They all like fit together. And then the one mask is, when they all fit together, forms one mask that the Antichrist will put on, wear. And what he was saying, Caleb was actually saying that he actually put these things on his head. And what he was also saying was that when you put them on your head, it channels like a different consciousness. You tap into like a different consciousness. So it's like, I think what on steroids times 2 gazillion, right? So suddenly everything is amplified. So you literally, these things would then connect to whoever it is that is controlling them or connected to them, right? And that is now literally going to be what the Antichrist wears. And obviously this information is going to be channeled to the Antichrist, or whatever the Antichrist, whoever that is, has to do, is going to get information in this way, which is fascinating. And it, again, all links up to this, because this would, of course, be the Vril Society, right? Who knows these things, who kind of like has been traveling in and out of portals, using that as keys and doorways and gateways to portals, right? And getting things and information and signing dark contracts. It all fits together, Dennis. It just makes so much sense. I don't know. What's your take on that?
Well, I think it's very, that could be very possible, definitely, and I think there will be some kind of something utilized by that, like that, by the Antichrist when he does take power, because the Bible talks about his image. Keep saying image, image, image about the Antichrist's image, and we do know that we are living in a society, in a world, and a culture now where image is everything. Just like the two images that we see of each other right now, we are using imagery here in that respect. The Antichrist is going to definitely use the technology that's there to do what he needs to do, without a doubt. And here's another aspect of all of this that goes back to the Nazis. If the Nazis tapped into this and made these dark contracts, then when we conquered them finally, and it was probably by God's will that we did that alone, okay, because they weren't meant to do the things that they were going to do, probably. But when we finally won the war against them and we brought their scientists over here, with Operation Paperclip and all that other stuff, they probably said, "Hey, why do we need to hook up with you? We've got this power here. We've got the source. We've already, and look, one of the men that we brought over took us to the moon. Okay, Werner von Braun." And I've seen pictures of him in his SS uniform. He helped us get to the moon. He was the father of modern rocketry. And of course, look at Jack Parsons. Jack Parsons, a disciple of Aleister Crowley. He got us to the moon. Where are we getting our science from, I ask? Where is our true science coming from? It's not coming from good factors most of the time. It's coming from a bad basis in that fact. And I think the Vril Society had a lot to do with that as well, because they were the instigators of this Nazi thirst for power, and they didn't care how they got it, and they hooked up with the wrong people to get it. But that's the way it went. And then, unfortunately, our government turned around and did the same thing.
Well, is it? I mean, if you look at that, I mean, when you talk, and I want to just be clear again, where I think the America was identified probably as the superpower because of the placement of the country. No doubt, to me, it would have been where ley lines, portals, etc. Everything was lined up to do whatever they needed it to do, if it was being used for the negative. So they placed their creatures in America, in the government, so that they can have control. So I don't want to say, I mean, I want to say even, is it really the American government, or is it entities or demonics that are actually hosting or have taken over a lot of the bodies that we're seeing of American politicians or actors or whatever, And I agree that at some point they would have had to have given permission. We understand that now. They would have had to have given permission for these creatures to come in. But when you see how they are abused, tortured, etc. as children, how many of these kids actually stand a freaking chance? You know what I'm saying, Dennis? So at what point does the true soul, of that person come through again? How do we release these people of the Vril? Because that's really what they've been sucked into, in my opinion.
But that's why I have made that statement in the past, that there are a lot of things out there walking around, Shanty, that look human but are not human. And then there are some things that once upon a time were human but are no longer so anymore. Okay, that's the way that goes, and I would believe that without a doubt. And that includes the corporate officers, that includes the lawyers, that includes the military, that includes everybody. They are in everywhere. And let me say this, okay? And if you talk about a country, just for example, as the United States of America, that once upon a time set itself up as being the beacon of the world, sort of saying, hey, we're all about freedom. We're all about the good things in this world. We're all about helping people. We're all about all that stuff. When you set yourself up like that, you must understand you got a target on your back. The good
Right,
guys have
for
put a
sure.
target on me. If you come to me today, Shandy, and said, well, I'm out here to help people, I want to do everything I can to give them the truth and to help people and to help people heal and all that stuff, then I say that is wonderful. Don't stop for anything, but understand this. You've got a target on you. The bad
Yeah,
guys don't like that. They're going to try to stop you. Okay. And we got to understand that. And definitely that includes nations, not just people. If you set your nation up to do something good, and I think it just recently, it came out that I think Kenya is leaving WHO. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Somebody woke up somewhere. But anyway,
well,
what I'm going to say is this, though, people are beginning to understand there is a force in this world that's not good, and they're out to destroy us. Basically, that's what it all comes down to, absolute destruction of the human race, okay? Because that's what their number one priority is. And they'll do it anyway,
absolutely.
whatever possible way it goes about. And I think I said, even giving us technology with which to destroy ourselves.
Absolutely. You talk about Kenya, and I definitely want to, because that is such a Vril operation, right? And I want to just maybe for those of you who didn't see it, yeah, I posted something this week. Kenya is withdrawing from the World Health Organization and the New World Order. It's the same thing, in my opinion. It is exactly the same thing, actually. And because they've basically discovered that some of the vaccines, and I forget the type of vaccine, but it's some neonatal vaccine that was supposed to obviously support women during pregnancy and stuff, is in fact aborting their babies. In other words, the women are having miscarriages and are absolutely becoming sterile. So and that's exactly what they've done throughout Africa, because they basically have said African life is cheap and there are way too many African people. And the only reason and that's not true, because if you look at it, Africa is actually the most underpopulated continent when you compare it to a lot of the other all of the other big continents, in fact. So, but really, what they want. And what they want in Africa is our resources. They want our resources. So in 83 as well, and I've spoken about this before, another Vril operation that they did here, not in 83, it happened throughout the 80s, was sending their horrible doctors in these pop-up clinics in all the rural areas, injecting people with the smallpox vaccine, right? And of course, what were they doing? Injecting them with AIDS. So AIDS was supposed to wipe out the African continent, but it didn't. So they're trying everything all the time, to do these things. And that's why I say these are Vril operations, because they want to steal the resources, but they can't do so while the people are on the land, right? All you got to do is read John Perkins's book, right? Confessions of an Economic Hitman. John Perkins, I've interviewed him twice, and he was actually going to all the third world countries. He wasn't CIA himself, but he was hired by companies who were CIA to basically corrupt the leaders and steal the resources. So this is not new. This has been going on since forever. This is just one way they do it. And they do it by creating war. They create war amongst the locals. They do the most horrific things, and to get the locals all killing each other, basically, and then they film it and put it on international news. It's crazy.
I think, unfortunately, for a long time now, Africa has been used as one big experiment on a lot of things. Okay,
Oh, yeah.
definitely. I think, yeah, without a doubt, especially even going back to Ebola and all that. But let me say this, and I'm not a prophet, and I'm not trying to predict anything, but I've got a feeling that somewhere down the line, very soon, an epidemic will come again. Okay, the pestilence will be again in our world, whether it's fake or real. Okay, they're going to use that as another means of control. They see how well it worked the first time. They will definitely not stop at trying it again, definitely. And we can look for that, I think, in the near future. And even the Bible predicts that. And you and I, we need to do a show one day on biblical prophecy. Shanty, it would be a fascinating subject. Anyway, the Bible talks about that pestilence and war and famine and all these things. And you've had every one of those in Africa, by the way. That's the way that goes. But not just Africa, and many other parts of the world too. But it seems like, Africa's been used as some kind of big experiment to me by somebody, some dark forces that are out there, definitely. But there are other places in the world picked on like that too. We've seen other countries done the same way. But I think people are beginning to wake up to that fact. But hopefully it won't be too late when they do. That's the problem. But getting back to the Vril Society for a moment, and if this is as far-reaching, if they hooked up with true alien consciousness like they thought, if they really made the dark deals that were brought over here to the United States and to the other countries that conquered Germany, that includes Britain and France and so on. If all of them sort of divided this up amongst themselves, we have a big problem going on. And I think this might be the answer to a lot of this stuff, is the fact that if they made these dark contracts and went into these dark agreements, and there's, rumors that Eisenhower did that, that far back, and so on. If we have made, and I don't think without a doubt that we have not made those contracts and not made those agreements. We want the power. We want that godlike thing, And I think this God game that they're playing, which goes on, and Hitler was playing that. Napoleon played it. Caesar has done it. It goes way back to Alexander the Great. There's a story about Alexander the Great. When he finally conquered the whole world, he sat down and cried because there wasn't nothing left to conquer. That's the way these men go, and that's why they want that thirst for power that drives them on, and they don't care what dark sources they get it from. And you see a lot of this in modern day Hollywood and sports arenas and all this. Where's all this dark money coming from? All these dark finances and stuff that's going, and that dark science, which when we're talking about Africa here, there's a lot of dark science going on in Africa. With that stuff too. So the list goes on and on and on and on. And the influence that these forces are having on mankind is far, far reaching, more so than we could even imagine.
Exactly. I wanted to ask you, actually, Dennis, sorry, the name, just while I'm looking here, the name Maria Orsic has come up quite a bit. Someone was asking earlier on, sorry, and I can't remember who. What is your take on Maria Orsic?
She was probably the instrument for a lot of this stuff. She considered herself to be highly psychic. And she was definitely the catalyst for a lot of it, definitely. She was a beautiful woman, too. I've seen photographs of her. But if you look at her, I don't know if it might be my imagination, but there seems to be a very cold look in her eyes. She looks very analytical minded kind of a lady, whether that's for good or bad, I don't know. But I think she had far-reaching connections, political connections, that she utilized without a doubt. And I think she was a lot of the driving force behind it. She might have been the only one, but she was definitely at the head of the group.
Right. Okay, well, I hope that answers you guys' questions who were actually asking about that earlier on. Dennis, I wanted to actually just go back to something you were saying early on when we touched on actually talking about Atlantis as well, because the Atlanteans, or the dark side again of Atlantis. I know Atlantis, obviously, just like Earth, they're good people and they're bad people, right? So the dark side was these guys that were literally using, I guess, the modern day term, or creating the chimera, right, in Atlantis. They were like putting animal and human things together and creating all sorts of apparitions there. So that, I would imagine, would already be the Vril energy that they were accessing there. What is your take on that? Because that would be Vril, in my opinion, to do something like that.
Well, like I said earlier about Africa being an experiment, I think these people, it goes that far back, goes way back to the point where this manipulation not only goes with humankind, manipulating the DNA of people, but it definitely went to manipulating the DNA of other living things as well, especially the animal life on this planet. I think that had a big part to do with it. Yeah, definitely. And still may be ongoing. I don't doubt without a bit that it is not still an ongoing type of a plan that's still in force. But I think that the main, supposedly according to those in the know, and that's Plato and some other people like that the main thing that happened with Atlantis was that they got so good and so highly advanced, and they became so prideful of themselves that sort of that was the beginning of their pride, was their fall. In other words,
Right.
that was kind of what Plato talked about. They thought they were gods, and they thought they were really better than gods because they were so smart and so highly intelligent. And supposedly the gods looked down upon that and said, okay, we're going to show you who's really in charge here. We're going to really
Exactly.
mess you up now. And that seems to be the formula that this stuff goes by. Definitely. When you get to a certain point, your pride can really do you in. And I think that's supposedly what happened with Atlantis, and that why it, was destroyed, because they not only, and here's the big thing about Atlantis, Shandy. It was just like the Vrilia, okay? And like I said, there was that connection between the Vrilia and Atlantis, because they said these were the guys that left Atlantis and went underground to survive and became the Vrilia, okay? They still had that power that they had in Atlantis, because most of the power in Atlantis didn't come from gas. It didn't come from any kind of fuel. It came from a sort of universal consciousness type power, okay? That power we talked about earlier, that God particle kind of stuff. That's what supposedly
Yeah.
the power
The
that
fake
drove
one.
Atlantis.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, and they abused
Wow.
it. Here's the lesson:
Yes.
if you abuse it, if you use it and abuse it, you're gonna pay for it.
Right. Always. There's always a price to pay. And that's very interesting. So basically, what we're saying here is the Vril comes from Atlantis. They were already using it in Atlantean times. So obviously, when Atlantis sunk, or the old Atlanteans went underground, right? That's kind of like, would that be then what? But then again, okay, do we know where the Atlanteans found it? Let me ask you that first. Do we know where the Atlanteans found the bro?
I think, and there is allusions in the book, if you read it, about gold too. By the way, the gold being a conductor for some of this stuff, being in part of it. And we go back and look through the cultures and many of the legends of the world about gold, the gods wanting gold, and so on and so on. So that's an important factor. And two, we won't get into that. But anyway, that's interesting when you look at that too. But here's the thing about supposedly the Atlanteans going underground. They still had that power. They still had the technology. That was very essential to them. And this technology goes beyond any true technology we can think of. I've often talked about what I call celestial technology. This is the
Yeah.
technology, the celestial mechanics of the angels. Okay, this stuff is far advanced, far beyond. And how would you utilize it? Okay, you would utilize it with the mind. And
Right.
that's what the
Absolutely.
Vrill were doing with the Vril, the power of the Vril, the coming race. Okay. And what he meant by the coming race is they're going to come out one day and take over again. Okay. But anyway, that's what he alluded to. But they're hooking up to this power with the mind. You don't need wires. You don't need computers. You don't need a cell phone. All you need are brain cells, and you hook up with this power. That is, like I said earlier, godlike power. Okay. And that is a celestial power. And let me say this, if you had that kind of power, Shanti, you would be a god. That's what you would be. And think about this. This will blow your mind when you think about it. Don't worry about getting in a spaceship going 1,000 light miles somewhere. Don't worry about the speed of light. If you had that power, you could utilize the speed of thought. You could say, I want to be on Mars, and you would be.
Yeah, absolutely. They
That's
have
faster than the speed of light.
absolutely. And it has the ability to control something like, I mean, like I have the ability to control this pen, right? By writing as a physical object, I get to move it. That energy just moves the mind and the will of someone else if it's in control of you. It's a
And then
non-physical.
there you have what we would call magic. Magic is
Yeah,
nothing but the manipulation of what? Reality. That's what it
exactly.
is. That's all it
And
is.
imposing your will upon someone else's will. So basically, your will, or whatever your intention is, if you're trying to spellcast someone or whatever it is, and if your will for or desire for that object or being is stronger than their will, that's going to override that. And that's when, if you know what you're doing, you're going to have control over that person's consciousness, and that's
And
what they're doing.
some of these entities use that to what we
Yeah,
call the glamour. They use that to get you to see things that aren't real. These are very deceptive beings. And like I said before, this is the ultimate intrusion of your privacy, the ultimate abuse that you can do against somebody. You can take somebody's blood, you can take somebody's life, you can cut a pound of flesh out of them. But when you really start messing around with somebody's soul and their spirit like that, that is the ultimate abuse. That's worse than anything.
absolutely.
Let me tell you a quick sad story. As a policeman one day, I went to a children's home, and I forget. I think we were delivering toys that day or something to them. Anyway, there was this beautiful little girl, and she was standing in a corner in the room. When I first saw her, I said, "What's going on?" I thought maybe she was in a timeout. She had done something. They were making, they were punishing her, and so I was talking to this lady, and I said, "Well, what's that little girl's story? Why is she standing over there facing the wall?" She said, "Well, that's a sad story." She saw something so bad that now all she wants to do all day long is stand there and look at the wall. That's bad. When
Sure.
you hurt, not just, I'm talking about physically abuse somebody, but when you
Spiritual
do
abuse.
that to their spirit, that's even worse in some ways.
Absolutely. But I think it has to start there first, in my opinion. So once you have control over someone else's soul, basically you can control them to fulfill your wishes and your desires, basically. When they have, and that's what the MK Ultra thing is about, isn't it?
Oh yeah, definitely. It's all about the control. It's just like
Yeah.
a lot of women who are abused by their husbands. They're slapped around by them because the men do that to what? Control them. There are different ways to control things. That's what the crime of rape is all about. We tell people it's not about lust, it's not sex, it's control.
Control
That's
and
what it
power.
is. And you do things like MK Ultra and all these other things. They're all about control, mind control. First of all, environmentally wise, you control the physical aspects of a person. Okay. You work on that first, and then you slowly get into the intellect and the mind of that person. Yeah. And then that also gets spiritually into them as well.
Absolutely.
Even the demonic knows how to utilize this because that's what demonic possession is. That's how they operate. They first began on you physically from the outside, slowly working inward to the intelligence and the spiritual and emotional aspects of you. That's the way they always operate. And that's the way mankind still follows this formula as well for any kind of control that they do. And that was the
Right.
one thing that the Vril Society laid out for the Nazis. They said, if you will control your mind, we call that directional thought. If you direct your mind, we call that concentration. Okay, that's the old word for it. This directional thought. If you can control that, you can tap into this power. You know,
Exactly.
they were doing
Exactly.
that. We have found some of the places where they performed these dark ceremonies. They were tapping into satanic stuff and demonic stuff. That's what they were really doing. But the Vril just gave it another fancy name.
Right. Exactly. What's that thing they call it? The Jai. The Jai, right? But is that the name of the character in this book, or the female, something like that? If I'm not mistaken. But or is that more? Is there more to it than just identifying what sex they are?
Yeah, I think, well, they sort of had asexual type names and all that, but
Hmm.
yeah, I think he was coming from the outside world, and he was sort of, and some of the women in this, if you look at this, are some of the leaders too. So they really had a more open society than where the man came from the surface. He found that very interesting, that they had a different society set up, you know
Right.
that was kind of alien to him as well. And the interesting thing is sort of a social thing for him. It's like why he couldn't understand why a lot of stuff was going on like that. But here is the thing they looked at, and the women, of course, they could pick out their own spouses or who they wanted to, and they could stay with them as
Yeah.
long as they wanted to. It was a very open society,
Yeah.
and he didn't, moralistically, it kind of bothered him, I think, a little bit. But anyway, the interesting thing was they said we tap into this power, and here's the interesting moral of the story. We tap into this power, and therefore the power becomes us, and we become
Yes.
the power. Yeah.
Exactly. So who controls who at the end of the day, right? Because it becomes so merged. I mean, let's call it, I mean, I don't know what to call it other than consciousness. Those two consciousnesses become so merged, right? That
Mhm.
who is actually controlling who? It kind of takes on a life of its own. So you have the body or the person, you have, call it the Vril, right? Or demonic, whatever. And the two, so there's one and two, and then they come together and they merge and they create this like life of its own. So there's like three entities now, and so it multiplies. It's crazy, man. They are so clever, these guys. Wow. They've really taken everything, because at the end of the day, Dennis, what I've figured out is, when you look at, for example, the Rosicrucian principles, there's nothing evil about those principles. They are universal principles, right? They've understood how the universe works. They've understood how energy works. And what they've really done is, so they've kind of laid out the principles, and some of them are quite beautiful. I mean, when you understand, I mean, when you're listening to that stuff, their end goal is to be happy, right? To find happiness and to share happiness with those around you. But like, what type of happiness are we talking about, right? Again, is it happy to have 10 cars and 14 houses, or is it really just coming from the other consciousness where you truly want humanity to thrive? And that, at the end of the day, is important. Yeah. Again, it boils down to intention.
I think the bad thing about that is it depends on how you apply things, of course, and what your attention is on how you apply some of this stuff. But the humanists, they tend to leave God out of the equation, which unfortunately I
Yeah.
think mankind needs God. And, just as very much as I think God needed man too, because he was part of his creation. But we need God more than, of course, than he needs us, definitely, him being God. But I think a lot of these things tend to leave or put God at too low of a level for that. To truly help mankind. There is a lie out there, Shanty, that says, and this is a big lie, that says all religions have truth in them. That's not true. Some can be very misleading religions. Okay, some may have truth, and some, like I say, can have a sort of what I call the appearance of truth, but may not be the real truth. We have to be very careful how we deal with that. and understand that. But we need God. We need that outside force. We need that connection there of our Creator, of where our beginning and our origins began. We need that more than, of course, God needs us. But we need that because that gives us. It's like I think Voltaire said. Okay, and listen to this very closely. A man's reach should exceed his grasp, or
Yes.
what's a heaven for? We should always be striving to be better, and God helps us do that. God says, hey, you can be better. You can be better than this. You can obtain something better than that. You can try to be like me as much as possible. And that was what Jesus said in the Bible. He said, the number one commandment I give you is love God with all your heart, your soul, and your mind, and then love your fellow man as you love yourself. These are the two greatest commandments, which everything else hangs on. And I think without that, if we decide to throw that out, then we are not doing ourselves any favors. Definitely.
I fully agree with that. I really, really do. And I mean, I think, again, when we look at this and we see what it is, putting the pieces together, to see how over time they've moved from one thing to the other, just kind of like maneuvering through a river, and then you'll have a little split that goes down there, but it meets up down the road again. So it's so many different things that are really coming from the same thing. And the bottom line is, I really think that's what we need to completely be aware of. There's real dark evil, right, which one can't miss. But then there's also total deception, right, which one misses very easily. And again, it's up to us. I think the only thing that we can do right now is be discerning. And it's true what you say, every person believes what they believe. They believe their religion for a reason. People have taught them that and told them that for whatever reasons. These fundamentalists believe these things because they believe, well, that's the way it has to be. But at some point, we've got to let that go. And I'm not really sure what the answer is, to be perfectly honest. But all I know is that if we wake up little bit by little bit, one by one, and really at the end of the day, Dennis, it boils down to love. How are we with each other? How do we treat each other? Really, to me, that's what it boils down to. I'm not sure what your take is on that.
I think somebody once said, if we ever find out what the true God particle is, we will find out that it is love. Okay, that's what truly binds the universe together. The love of the love of God, or God's love, is what the true God particle really is. And I think to a certain extent they are correct in that surmise. That may be definitely what that's all about. But when we tap into that type of love, now that's what I'm talking about, unconditional type love. And I'm not talking about romantic love, and I'm not talking about the love of money or fame.
Yeah.
I'm talking about real love here, okay? Unconditional love, God-like love. When you tap into that, things get done. This is the greatest force in the universe. They didn't understand that, just like the Vril Society. Hey, that's what we need to be going with here. That is what gets things done, not the other way. Just like you said about the certain roads that people go down. You can either go down a dark, dead-end road, and where you're going to be. You need to be on the right road. And we got to remember one other thing, okay? Religions, whatever they may be, are man-made stuff. They're made by men and women, okay? They're made by the humankind. Therefore, they are imperfect. Okay, you got to remember that. All the religions in the world, not
It's always about perception.
all of them, they're imperfect because they're made by men. But they're just man's trying to get to God. That's what's going on here. Like you said, all these roads coming from different places. It's man trying to get to God, but we don't understand. We need to let God get to us.
Exactly.
Go the other way. And that's why this religion has been used and abused over all these years. I don't, I hate you because you're one religion and I'm another. What's that got to do with it? God doesn't want that. Okay, that's definitely not what God wants, and that's why God is not in the religion business. Okay,
Exactly.
definitely not. I've asked people that before in a lot of lectures I've done. What religion, by the way, is God? Can anybody tell me that? He is not a religion, okay? He doesn't need one anyway. But he's not one because that's not what he deals in. That's man, okay? And that's like a lot of controversy going on in the world today about the different sexes, okay? In the beginning, there was man and woman, the female and male. And anything else besides that is man-made. Think about it. It's man-made.
Exactly.
I hate to say it, but it is. That's us doing that. And we've got to always remember, no matter what we make, whether it's atomic bombs or whether it's AI or whether it's anything else, what it may be, is not going to be what? Perfect. No drug or medicine you take is going to be perfect. It's not going to do it because we are imperfect. Imperfection does not create perfection. So what are we doing? We're trying to obtain that perfection called God. God is perfection. Don't you understand? That's what makes him God. But unfortunately, we lose sight of that because we get caught up in the world today when how many cars we own or how big our bank account is or whatever the situation is. And we lose the apathy we have for other people. And like I said that before, that statement I made earlier about there are people walking around out there that are no longer human. Why are they no longer human? They haven't turned into aliens. They have lost their souls. They have lost their true humanity. And that's a sad state. That's a sad state to be in. But why have they lost their humanity? Why have they lost their soul? They have turned their backs on that true love.
Right.
That true love that binds the universe together when you think about it. Okay. And that love is God.
Exactly. Absolutely. It's like I always say, God is seeking spiritual fruit, not religious nuts.
Absolutely.
But anyway, Dennis, I have another question, and I don't know how much more time we have here, really, but I have one more question.
I go as long as you want to go. Okay.
What I thought was actually quite interesting was that if we look at the First Nations, for example, like the Vikings, right?
Mm-hmm.
Were they using the Vril? Are they part of that Vril? Because I mean, if you look at the Vikings being part of the First Nations, one always tends to think, or often tends to think, that the First Nations or maybe the good tribes, whatever. But you look at the Vikings, they came in, they really are warmongers, right? And I don't want to say that's all bad because there are times where you have to defend and do whatever. But with the magic that they came in with, do you think that is part of the Vril? Coming from the Vril, do you think, the Vikings and what they did, and I guess still do?
Well, Viking, by the way, and I like to call them the North people because actually Viking is a profession, okay? And it's sort of like we talk about witchcraft. Witchcraft is not a religion, it's a profession, okay? Anyway, Vikings, that was their way of life. They went from place to place raiding and doing all that kind of stuff because that was, let me put it this way, and it's kind of a lazy way to live, unfortunately. I got some Viking in me, okay?
I got 6%. There's no 9%. I've got 9% in me.
But I think they were saying, hey, it's a hard life to farm and do some stuff. Oh, they were farmers. They were excellent farmers. They said, hey, it's a little bit easier. We just go steal some stuff. We go raid some places or we take some land when we want it. That's just the way it went. But everybody was doing that to everybody else. You can't just blame the Vikings. Everybody, if they saw, and that's what we talked about a lot about these witchcraft trials. They were not being put on. They didn't really think they were witches. This was a way to steal people's land and get things away from people. This was a smart way to, they thought a smart way to do it. And that didn't just go on with individuals. This went on with nations doing this kind of stuff, and that's what the Irish used to say about the Vikings coming. Oh, here come the Vikings again. What do they want this time? Kind of thing. And that's the way they went. But guess what? Sometimes, and there's even evidence that the Irish raided the Vikings. Okay, everybody did this to everybody else. Okay, and you really don't have much of an argument anymore. If you can say somewhere in the world today, oh, you came in and stole my land. Well, everybody did that to everybody. It wasn't just one certain people. And that's like that argument about certain people being slaves. Everybody at one time or another was somebody's slave. That's just,
I
you go
get
back
that.
through history. Nobody's got a moratorium on slavery, okay? Everybody was doing it,
No, I totally get that. But if you look at like the Vikings and what do you call those guys that are, oh man, that connect to the bear energy?
You're thinking about the you talking about the Berserkers?
Berserkers, yeah, the Berserkers and those guys. That was definitely, I mean, those guys are definitely working with some kind of supernatural energy. And I'm wondering, as one of the First Nation tribes in our current third dimensional reality, they certainly have had some superpowers. So I'm wondering, So I'm wondering where if that's part of the Vril tribe.
Well, there again is a manipulation of reality, and to a certain extent. Okay, but I like to call it. There's different kinds of magic in this world that you tap into, and I like to call this mind magic. Okay, because a lot of this is centered in the mind. It's the will of the human mind to accomplishing these things and not using an outside force kind of a thing. Now, you look at the Berserkers, and there was another group of them called the Uffendar. The Uffendar would turn into werewolves like. Yes, and they even scared the Berserkers, okay? They were so bad. They were mean guys, okay? So anyway, the Berserkers could put on the bear skin and become bears like, okay? But it's what they would like take. They would take certain drugs. Skinwalkers do this too. I have to tell you sometime about a run-in I had with some skinwalkers one time. Anyway, skinwalkers can do this, but skinwalkers are using sort of an outside magic. Whereas in the Berserkers are using, and this happened with the leopard men in Africa. Well, the same way. They were the equivalent of the Berserkers, okay? And then you had the jaguar men in South America. They were the same. You had this different. They were cults, and they believed, without a doubt, from the power of their mind, and by using certain drugs and stuff too, that they became these animals.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Absolutely.
And I think the British colonies had a big problem with the leopard men, and to this day, I don't know if you know this or not, the leopard men still exist. They still are a cult. They still are a force. They were also called the African Mafia, okay, because that's the way they operated on stuff. It's a fascinating thing, but I call this mind magic because it is the will of the human mind to do these things, and it is all about control. They were controlling their bodies to become better warriors or to become societies that they wanted, whatever the situation. They were using this mind control kind of a thing, but they don't understand too that there is a factor in all of this, Shanti, that is spiritual as well, because you can never divorce us as human beings from the spirit, because that's what we are. We have that spirit in us. That's part of us, And I've said this to many people over the years. My career of over half a century now, that I've told people this from time to time. We can never ever ignore the spiritual aspects of the universe, because that's part of us too.
Exactly. Well, I think, without our spirit, we wouldn't exist, right? So really, sorry, I wanted to put something up there. I think this one, yeah. Sorry, this one, yeah. I'll put the others up now. Yeah, Makumba is a source of shapeshifting in Africa. Absolutely. There's a lot of that. We've got to do a couple of shows on that, Dennis, as well, because you talk about the leopard men as well. I'm interested because I know what those leopard guys have to do. They actually have to kill the leopard themselves to connect with that leopard and then the leopard embodies them, and they become like leopards, man. You must see them. It's these guys that do the bushwalk. They like suddenly they just appear out of nowhere like a leopard. I mean, I don't know what else. I mean, there's a lot of stuff, but it's like that type of stuff that goes on. So is it the same with the berserkers, though? Do they have to actually kill the bear to be able to embody that spirit? Right.
Well, once upon a time, if I had met you on the battlefield and killed you, I would eat your liver. Why? Because that would be taking not only your life, but your spiritual power as well. And that's the way they looked upon these things, you know. That's why you had to kill a lion or a leopard or a bear and all that to accomplish a lot of these things. There is a, I don't know if you know this or not, but I know this. I've never done it myself. I've done some deer hunting in my time, but you kill a deer. The first time you kill a deer, you supposedly drink some of its blood because that's supposed to be a ritual that you do, showing that you have the power, you're a great hunter over this animal, okay? And that's the way they looked at it. So there's a lot of this is ceremony, okay? That's tied into the ceremony of what? There you go again, power. It's all about power.
Mm-hmm. Always about power. Always, always, always. Always about power. That really is what it boils down to. But really, at the end of the day, when you realize, I mean, you know, there's nothing more liberating than God's power, God with a big G. And it's something that we don't have to fight for. It just is. And that's the beauty of this.
That's sort of like, you know, saying, hey, you know, you hook into my power, you don't have to worry about your power. You can tap into my power, kind of a thing. That's the way God is. Okay, he can say, if you have faith in me, I can take care of these things. I can give you not control and not power, but a more better life, kind of a thing. You know, that enhances you spiritually, physically, and so on. That's what we call the blessings of God. That's why we call it that. You know, if you tap into that, that's what you get from it. So you're not power thirsty because you believe in God. You the faith that you have in God gives you a more complete and better lifestyle or a better way to live. That's what it's supposed to be about. Okay, although some people don't look at it, like I say, you can use and abuse things like that. Definitely, unfortunately, from our side of it, that happens a lot. But that still doesn't, you know, make it God's fault because we do that. That's on us, unfortunately, when we do that, definitely. But to me, I think there's so many different spiritual ramifications of this that you have to take into a lot of account on these things, from what your true intentions are and your honest intentions are about these things. And of course, I think God knows that too, but you got to know where you're coming from too, you know, in that respect.
You've got to be ready you've got to be in the right place to receive it and work with it and embody it. You know, that for me is really what it's about, Dennis. It's about, you know, we get to a place where we can learn the biblical teachings or scriptures, right? But the time comes where we embody them and then we live them, and then we just act in accordance with God's desire for us, right? And really, that's, I think, what we have to be able to achieve is really get over this desire for power, for money, this fear that there's not enough, because humans tend to think there's not enough. It's been imprinted into our psyche for so long that there's not enough money, there's not enough food, there's not enough resources to go around. And we've got to get out of that, because that's a lie. There is an abundance of everything on this planet, you know, and we've got to start learning through, I think we the ones that are going to rebuild this planet. And we've got to do so with a different consciousness, with different intentions, not even consciousness. Well, we can't have different intentions if our consciousness is not different. So we have to change the way we think about things and stop seeing anyone and everything as the enemy that doesn't agree with us. So we have to learn to love people and embrace people and start communities and do things like that for people. So that, for me, is what it's about. What's your take on that?
Well, you know, I think the Bible teaches us a lesson that when humans actually get together and truly cooperate and work together, there's nothing that they can't do. Of course, they don't need to do that in a prideful way, in an arrogant way.
Right.
Their intentions always need to be in the right way for things like that. I
Yeah.
think definitely our creator likes that idea that we would get together and do things the right way for all the right reasons, and
Yeah.
especially being the basis of it would be love. Okay, absolutely. Without that, you wouldn't have anything. So I think that the Bible shows us that definitely it does that. The Word of God tells us that, but also, that's the job of the Holy Spirit as well. The Holy Spirit that dwells in us, that comes in and stays in us, teaches us these things or
Right.
guides us into these things that we need to know and understand. And that's why I tell people a lot of times, just my own self, personally, my own opinion. I love to read just the words of Jesus in the Bible because he was so clear, so precise on these things. He was, meant to be that way. By the way, it was laid out to be that way. A lot of the Bible was some of it you can read as some of the opinions of Paul and Peter and all that. Definitely, they had their opinions. Men always have their opinions. Okay, that's the way it goes. But Jesus laid it out very plainly and very blank. So I've often said, people said, I don't understand this. Best thing to do is go to his words, read his words, and see what he said about it. And that will give you, I think, a clearer understanding. But we must understand, like I say, and like I said earlier, we can't ignore the spiritual aspects because that is what makes up most of us. One day when you and I no longer have these meat jackets that we're wearing right now, we will become higher on the level of spiritual attainment. Definitely. As the Bible says, as you see through a mirror darkly right now, one day you will see all things. You will have
Yeah.
a higher level of godlike consciousness then that you will operate off of. And so I
Absolutely.
tell people until then, I wouldn't worry so much about some of this stuff. Don't sweat the small stuff. Just take care of the most important stuff that needs to be done, and work on that. But I
Absolutely.
think our Creator wants us to work at always work at being better people and better to each other. What did He say? The greatest commandment I give you is to love each other as I have loved you.
With you.
That is a very
Absolutely.
distinct, complete command there. And if we were to go by that, look how many problems would be solved with that one thing alone. Um, so I think that's what we need to work on. And when we work on stuff like that, it always enhances us spiritually, definitely. And
Absolutely.
I
That's
think
what raises our vibration. That's
connections
the
like
thing that raises our vibration, Dennis. That's what I always say about raising your vibration. That's how we do it.
mm-hmm.
There's no big trick to it. It really is just being kind and really love one another as I have loved you. Um,
Yeah.
and that's what we aspire to, because when we can do that, that's when we win this war. Really, that's how we win the war.
I know,
It's through love.
and
Mm.
another aspect of that we got to remember too is the balance. We've got to
Yeah.
balance everything out right. It's what Jesus said. If the darkness in you is greater than the light, then how great is that darkness? You want to have that balance where you got more light in you than darkness, because we know what the darkness leads to. We know what the darkness is all about. We want to balance that always with more light being there, because
Absolutely.
light. Here's the thing I used to tell little kids about being afraid of the dark. I say, look, you got to remember the dark is nothing. It's nothingness. That's why it's dark. It's nothing. The light, on the other hand, is something. When you open a door, the darkness doesn't fall in your house. The light falls out because it's something. So, what are you
Exactly.
afraid of? Nothing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. And it's just so nice that everyone, I love our chats, because I love our people, and I know a lot of our there's a lot of cross watchers here from Jessica's channel, your channel, everyone's channel, and just connecting. I love it. It's so cool. And Dennis, wow. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And I know there's still a lot more we're going to talk about in the future around this. But I'm wondering if there's anything you would just like to say for us before wrapping up this evening, or this morning for you. I'm like 20:39, yeah. past 8, 20 to 9. I'm all good. It's so nice to be hanging out with you guys at night.
Well, I just want to say that no matter what dark agreements may have been made in this world, what dark contracts, whatever name you want to give them, no matter what things have been done against mankind in the shadows and the darkness of this world, there's one thing we can always keep inside in mind. We can break those contracts. We
Yeah,
can
for
break
sure.
those promises. We can break that darkness, but it has to begin with each one of us individually on our own. By, like I said earlier, letting that light be more predominant, letting that love rule our lives. That's what begins to break these contracts and break these agreements that may be set
Absolutely.
against us. I've said this before, life is already hard enough without these guys coming along and making it harder on us. Okay. I don't like that. And I don't think anybody with any sense knows that they don't like that. So, but we have the power to break that. We have the power to break that power over us that they're trying to get over us. And we can do it with light and love. Those are the two main things. But it begins with each one of us singly on an individual basis, determining to do that. Or I call it directional thought. You're determined to do that, then that's where it begins. That's where the healing begins.
Absolutely. I so agree with you. Dennis, would you like to end off for us in prayer today?
Yes, okay. Let's bow our heads. Dear Heavenly Father, we ask that you once again touch everyone listening and watching this program today, that you become real to them, that you show them the way that they need to go in this world of darkness that surrounds us, that you be the light on our pathway and enlighten us to where we need to go and to the echelon of the height that we need to know you on in a special and real way. I ask also that you protect everyone listening today by the power of your holy angels, that you put a hedge of light and love around everyone listening and watching this program today. I want to thank you for those people like Shanti and all these other people that are watching who are warriors of light, who will stand with us against the darkness that seeks to overcome us. And having done all to stand, we will stand with you and in your love, Heavenly Father. And in the name of Jesus Christ, we pray that your will always be done. Amen.
Man. Thank you, Dennis. Really appreciate that. Guys, thank you so, so much for joining Dr. Dennis and myself. And we've still got more to talk about, Dennis, on this topic, do we?
We always
Lots
open up more cans to investigate.
Okay, tune in for part 3. Watch this space, and it's super interesting. As I said, for me, it's just like bringing it all together. Something is it's just like suddenly just talking about this, because for me, what's very clear here is that the Vril is really the energy, or the energy that is used to create this evil crap. And it all comes from there. It's like the highway to hell. That's what I was saying earlier on. To me, it really seems like it's the highway to hell. We think it's the God seed. Did you call it the God seed, Dennis? Right? But it's actually not.
The God
So just,
particle, yeah.
yeah, God particle. Sorry.
Yeah.
So it's like it's walking a very slippery slope here. But this is why we have amazing guests like Dr. Dennis Carroll on ARA. And I so look forward to seeing you guys. What's tomorrow? Friday. Yes, I've got Jan Breeze tomorrow in the morning, but you Americanos will be sleeping. I have Leo Zagami in the evening. We have Brock from Nasara 17. And on Sunday, we have Jesse on Patreon. And I think Mr. Jade might have given you a little clue in the chat. And that's all I'm saying. Take it easy, everybody. God bless you all. Mwah. See you soon. Bye, Dennis. Thank you. So appreciate having you.